So this is a really interesting session because the whole idea of purpose, it's a big question. And I sat there thinking about the theme, and here's this financial guy, this accountant that is going to talk about purpose. And I think that there's some things that I want to come to you with. One is I'll probably start off a little more philosophical than you would expect an accountant to do or a financial guy to do. And then we'll get tactical and we'll get to money and we'll really try to mold it around your money gain and your wealth creation gain, but really starting with this idea of purpose. And so I wasn't going to do this, but this morning I get up early and I was up at 4:30 this morning, and I usually do my writing, my journaling, and thinking. And this morning, I'm going to take you into my journal, which could be a little bit scary. It could be a little bit nutty, but I just want you to understand what I'm thinking about when it comes to purpose. Because I think that when you talk to a lot of people in the coaching and the mentoring and everything, when they are struggling with this idea of purpose, there's this angst around it. And I'm not sure that we need the angst. I feel like it's the angst that's going to keep us away from the purpose. And so hopefully some of this will give you some things to contemplate, some things to consider. And the first thing is to really understand that purpose doesn't, and this is where I think we disconnect, purpose doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be happy. Happiness and purpose aren't the same thing. And so we need to start to understand why we're looking for purpose, why we're looking for meaning, and what is going to truly give us happiness. I remember, I had a bike accident in 2009, and it was a mountain bike accident. I flipped my bike. I was riding down a hill, 25, 30 miles an hour because I was coasting as fast as I could, and I was right into the gym. I was angry. I was distracted. I was not paying attention, and my shoelace got caught. And I clipped the brake. I flipped the bike. It came down on my head on concrete. And before I knew it, I'm waking up with a grade 4 concussion. I'm stuttering. I have no feeling on the right side. And a dear, dear friend of mine, as I was recovering that next week, comes over. He says, "I'm taking you to lunch." Now I'm in a neck brace. I can barely move. I'm sore. I don't know what's happening with not feeling on the right side. And we go to lunch, and he's looking across the table at me, and he looks at me and he says, "How much is enough?" I go, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "How much is enough? Because the reality is that the reason you got into this bike accident is because you were distracted, because you were angry, because you weren't present in the moment. And if you don't know where your finish line is, if you don't know what enough is, you'll get back on that bike. You'll go pedaling again. You'll go after it again. And you'll have another accident until you get the message." And it got me to understand that there's this drive for purpose that's not the same as the need for happiness and contentment and appreciation for what we have. But then the other thing that I realized is that purpose is likely not one thing. We seem to want to come together and say, what is my overall purpose in life? Now, I started to do that. But what I really realized is that I get different purposes. I have a different purpose as a grandfather. I have a different purpose as a husband. I have a different purpose as a mentor, as a coach. Now, I can look backwards, as Steve Jobs says, and start to connect things and see a theme across all of them. But that's actually, in retrospect, not looking towards the future. And so if we're okay with starting to understand that maybe, just maybe, I have more than one purpose, and maybe there's a purpose for this season, and maybe there's a purpose for this context, it allows you to have the opportunity to find yourself in purpose in the moment right now. The other thing that I wrote down was this, that purpose isn't and may not be in isolation. I'll be married 11 years, and my purpose and my wife and I both have a combined purpose that we bring together. And to look at this and say that I don't need to be alone in my purpose. I don't need to be siloed in my purpose, and that it may be revealed to me over time. And truly, purpose becomes more of the discovery on the journey of where we're going from. Because I came out of school, was going to be a typical accountant, realized that wasn't my purpose. That wasn't what I wanted to do. I wasn't happy. I decided that I was going to get out of it. And I kept searching and I kept searching. And what ends up happening over time is that it's a process of discovery. And here's the three things I think you need to start to unveil and allow your purpose to reveal itself. And the first is an openness to accept what is, an openness to accept the possibility that maybe it's a different path than what you're on, or an openness to accept that it is the path you're on. That doesn't mean that it's always joyous. And in fact, I will challenge that maybe there is a reason for that. So the first thing is to have an openness to accept. The second, I think, is to have a courage to act. There's so many people like I've got an identical twin brother. Yes, he looks exactly like me. We have our wives believe that we share the same brain, and it's just a matter of which one is using it at the time. So we look exactly alike, but he worked for someone for 35 years, and yet he was unhappy. He hated every day. He was dreading it every day, but he didn't have the courage to act until he did. He finally did, to make a decision, to make a change, to say, I wasn't destined for this. And so I think that if we have the openness to accept, we then need the courage to act. And then once we have the courage to act, then we need the dedication. Number three is to have the dedication to become. The dedication to become of who you were meant to be. I think if we really strip everything down to what we're here to do, is to live our lives fully expressed, fully immersed, fully experienced. So when we get to the end of our time, whenever that is, we can look back on that life and go, like the song says, I did it my way, and you have some peace. And I want to have a frank conversation around money. I want to talk about how do you win the year financially this year. And I talk a lot about affluence. And I want to just lay the groundwork here real quickly. And those of you that know me know that it's not a training with me if I don't do any kind of drawing. So I might just do some drawing on the iPad for y'all and everything. And that is that affluence is often confused with opulence. And that's not what I mean. Actually, affluence has four aspects to it, and I'm going to draw it out for you, and you'll see it if you stay here. You'll be able to see it this way. But there's four things that affluence have, an affluent life has. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a student, whether you're a homemaker. It doesn't matter whether you're a corporate exec. This is the way I started to look at things, and you'll hear a little more about my story and how this came about. But the first aspect of an affluent life is that it's a meaningful life. And what do I mean by that? I mean that it's a life that gives you joy from the inside out. Gives you joy from the inside out. The challenge is that a lot of times we spend our life doing things that isn't giving us joy. And so what I want to do is make sure that, first off, that the things that you're doing are meaningful to you. The second aspect is that it's impactful. The first part, meaningful, is internal. Impactful is external. It's how am I making a difference in the people and the lives that I serve, the differences that I make, the people that I get a chance to be around. Okay. So it's impactful. Now, meaningful life is typically has to do with the plan that you put in place. Impactful life typically has to do with the vision you create. Okay. Now there's two other aspects to it. Now, the third aspect, and this is the only aspect that has to do with money, is that it needs to be a fruitful life. I got to pay the bills. I got to look, and I'm an accountant, so we're going to talk about that. And so I want to pay the bills. It's got to be fruitful. It's got to take care of my needs. It's got to take care of my desires. It's got to take care of my dreams. Okay. And that's about building what I call a money machine. We'll talk a bit more about that over this year and see what needs to be in place for that. And then the third aspect, and this becomes really important, I think, from the context of what we're looking at, is that it needs to be a peaceful life. I mean, if we look back of where we've been in the last 2 years and everything, is at really understanding how do we live a meaningful life, an impactful life, a fruitful life, and a peaceful life. That to me is affluence. It has nothing to do with opulence. You can have affluence sitting in a tent in Montana or a yacht in Monaco. Okay. It doesn't matter what your definition of success is, or your definition is, as long as it's meaningful, impactful, fruitful, and peaceful. And so as we move forward, when we talk about affluence, I'm going to invite you to take that on. If that makes sense to you, let me know in the chat. Let me know that this is landing for you. Okay. So whether you have, and I want to be really clear on this, because the very first key is this: the money taboo is keeping you broke. The fact that we can't communicate, or that we choose not to communicate about money, is a problem. You know, I was just reading a thing. It was a law that was just passed in Ohio, where now it's a requirement for all high school students to go through a financial literacy program. And when we do some numbers here, you'll start to see how we can cure the financial ills. Now, the problem with the money taboo is we all have these stories. We all have these emotions, and I have them. I've interviewed billionaires, millionaires, and on down to people that are just starting out. And, you know, without question, every single one of them has some level of shame, blame, embarrassment, or guilt around money. Some because they have money, some because they had it and lost it, some because they don't have it, some for whatever reason, it's there. So the stories are something that we need to deal with. But if we have money problems, we can't solve money problems without having money conversations. How many problems in this world ever get solved without a conversation? So what I want to do is make sure that we have sane, safe conversations around money. And the first things to do is for you to commit to saying, I'm going to have a conversation. I'm not going to shun this money conversation. And I would be, I'd be remiss to do this if I didn't say this. I actually believe that there is no such thing as a money problem. Now, you might be saying, Mel, I'm trying to pay my bills. I'm trying to figure this out. What do you mean there's no such thing as a money problem? Now, this is hard for people to take on sometimes when I say this, but what you're really dealing with is a money symptom. See, where we are financially is a symptom of our behaviors, our habits, and our choices of the past. Okay? Everything's a money symptom of what we've done in the past. Here's the tough part of that. I now have to take responsibility of it. Remember what I said. You have to take responsibility. I didn't say blame. Okay. I am not without mistakes. I lost 1/3 of my net worth in a Ponzi scheme, well into 7 figures. Me and two other buddies, between the three of us, we lost $4.5 million. Okay. I had to take responsibility for it. I didn't take the blame, but I took responsibility, because then it gave me the opportunity to say, I can change my behaviors. I can change my decisions. I can change my choices. And now I can change my money symptoms. And so it's important for us to start to have these conversations at a level that we start to understand that we're in the behavior game. It's not a money game when we look at it. So that's key number one. So good to be here with all of you today. I want to talk about this whole idea of reinvention. Here's my belief, and when this kind of topic came up, I started to think about, my journey. And I actually think that life is just a constant state of reinvention. It truly is. And we have a choice of how that's going to play out, because reinvention equals, to me, it equals progress. It equals growth. Put it the other way around. If you want growth, if you want progress in life, then it's going to require us to reinvent ourselves, and it doesn't have to be some crazy go in a cocoon and sprout out a butterfly kind of perspective, but it can, because I think that our reinvention can be one of two ways. It can be evolutionary, incremental, if you will, or it can be revolutionary. I mean, a huge jump. And I'll give you some for instances, because I think that this is important for us to understand that there are triggers that will cause us to reinvent ourselves. And those triggers can simply be something like choice, okay? Choosing to do something. When I was working for the big consulting firm in downtown Los Angeles, I realized I was miserable. I realized I was living someone else's life. And so I made a choice. I walked in and I quit. I said, I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm not doing this anymore. It was choice. Okay. Another trigger could be events. We had the pandemic. I had cancer. It could be a marriage. It could be a birth of a child or a grandchild. It could be a breakup. There are events in our life that allow us to start to look at things and say, I need to re-examine. And I'm going to give you a framework to walk through this, because when I look back on my moments of reinvention throughout life, there's a pattern. There's a pattern in a process that I've used throughout, whether it's recovering from the Ponzi scheme or anything else. I think that there's a pattern and a process to use and make it happen. Now, one of the things to realize is interesting. Joan put retirement. It is an event in life. Here's an interesting thing from a guy who talks money. Most of my work is to help people create wealth, to create financial freedom, to give them the affluence way. Here's the interesting thing. When we transition to retirement and we're starting to try and spend that wealth, man, so many people have a hard time with it. There's a reinvention point right there in doing that. The other thing that can trigger reinvention is health. Many of you know that in 2019, I was diagnosed with bladder cancer. And I'm happy to say I'm 2 years clear and clean after 3 surgeries, 4 tumors, and 43 treatments. But I remember as I spiraled down into the despair, the darkness, the blame, the search for, why did I get cancer? No one in my family had cancer. I wasn't a drinker. I wasn't a smoker. I didn't have the risk factors. Why did this happen to me? What is it that happened to me? And many of us may be looking at our current circumstances and looking for a place to blame, and looking for a place to point the finger, to look for the why, if you will. And people a lot of times talk about that why. Here's what I realized. The more I spent time looking backwards in my past to try and find the reason for the cancer, the darker, the more despair, and the more I spiraled down. And it wasn't until I said to myself and asked the question, what if the reason for the cancer isn't behind me, but it's in front of me? What if my why is yet to be defined? Now that empowers me, and that gives me the opportunity to look at it through a different eyes. But in there was a moment of reinvention, a moment of examination, and a process where we need to intentionally integrate what we do. I think about this whole thing from this perspective. We're a pound of clay, and we're outside of ourselves. We're the sculptor, and we get a chance to chip away the things that we don't want and to leave the things that we choose to have. And that's where reinvention comes from. So here's the thing, as I think one of the first things that we need to bring into our into our place, there's three things that it takes. And the first is awareness. If I'm truly not aware of what's going on, and I'm just kind of going through life, we got in a boat, we're on a current, we don't have rudders, we don't have oars, and we're just floating. We're just floating. The problem is that we then end up, like Bronnie Ware said in her book, The 7 Regrets of Dying. One of the biggest regrets was living someone else's life. So we end up living a life that wasn't meant for us. And so what ends up happening is that I think ultimately, if we're not careful here, you end up in a situation where you're living life, and this might be confronting for some of you, but the empowering thing is that with that, it gives you the control back. We might be living life oblivious. We might be living life mildly miserable. I remember a dear friend of mine who got in a car accident. He got hit by a car and he had a hip problem. He was in the martial arts with me, and he lived with the pain in his hip for decades. And then all of a sudden he went and had a surgery, not a hip replacement, but a special surgery. And he didn't walk out, but after he started walking, he looked at me and he said, I had no idea how much pain I got used to. And how many of us, we get used to what's going on in life and we get used to the pain. It's just our existence and we just keep going. Whereas what ends up happening is that there's two things that I think will help us pass through this phase. And the first is this, is to make sure that you come at it with this idea of curiosity, with that child's mind to say, I'm just curious. I love the question of what if it were possible? What if it was possible? What if it were possible for you to have $1 million a year? What if it was possible for you to live a vibrant and healthy life? What if it was possible for you to have a wonderful, loving relationship? Because in the end, it is. And when it is, you need to do the second thing, and that is to make a decision.
This can be your day for personal growth. This can be that day you committed to and you remember and you go, that was the day I got myself a community. I got better coaches. I committed to making my life the absolute best that I could. This is that day. Make today your growth day. Click the button on this page and sign up right now.